The bottle in her hands was worth $11,000, and someone at this restaurant had been pouring counterfeit into it for 6 months. Vittoria Ricci turned the label toward the candlelight, running her thumb along the edge of the foil capsule, feeling for the seam that should not exist. It existed, a hairline ridge where the original had been sliced open, drained, and refilled with something that cost $40 a case. She had found 4 bottles like this tonight alone. The restaurant paid her to find exactly this kind of theft, a forensic sommelier hunting fraud instead of flavor, and she was very good at her job because she noticed the things people wanted hidden. She did not notice the man watching her until his voice arrived at her shoulder. It came from the private corner table, low and unhurried, the kind of voice that did not need volume because the room had already learned to listen for it. She turned. He was seated with his back to the wall, the way certain men always sat, a habit that had nothing to do with comfort. Dark hair combed back without a strand out of place, a charcoal suit cut close enough to show he had not gained a pound since it was made. A signet ring on his right hand, heavy, old, the kind of thing passed down rather than bought. Across from him sat another man, younger, restless, his tie already loosened though the night had barely started. This second man had been watching her since she walked the floor with her little leather notebook, and now he leaned toward the man in the charcoal suit and said something Vittoria was not meant to hear. She heard it anyway. "She's hot." The reply came without a pause, without a smile, without anything that resembled interest in the conversation at all. "She's mine." 2 words, flat as a closed door. The younger man laughed like it was a joke between friends, but Vittoria watched the older man's face and understood, with the same instinct that told her a wine label had been tampered with, that he had not meant it as a joke. He had meant it as fact, as something already decided, filed, and closed, and he seemed almost surprised to have said it out loud, as if the words had escaped before he approved them. She should have looked away. She did not. His eyes found hers across the room and held there. Dark, unreadable, the kind of stillness that came from a man who had trained himself never to react first. He did not apologize for being overheard. He did not look embarrassed. He simply watched her the way he might watch a door he had not decided whether to open, and Vittoria felt the temperature of the room shift several degrees, though nothing physical had changed at all. She set the bottle down, closed her notebook, and walked directly toward his table, because running from a problem had never solved one in her life, and she was not about to start with a stranger's careless claim. Up close, he was older than she had guessed from across the room, maybe 45, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he did not sleep as much as he should. His cologne reached her before she stopped walking, cedar and something darker underneath it, tobacco maybe, or the ghost of gunpowder that no amount of good tailoring could fully erase. His hands rested flat on the white tablecloth, still as carved stone, and she noticed a thin scar tracing his left knuckle that told its own story. He clearly had no intention of telling hers. "I'm not anyone's," she said. "Not yours, not his, not the maitre d' who keeps calling me sweetheart either, while we're doing corrections tonight." The younger man laughed again, delighted, but the man in the charcoal suit did not laugh at all. He studied her the way he had studied the room when she first walked in, cataloging, assessing, filing away information he intended to use later. It was not the look of a man flustered by a woman standing up to him. It was the look of a man recalculating. "My apologies," he said. His voice carried no real apology in it, only acknowledgement, the way a man might acknowledge a fact he had gotten wrong about a shipment or a schedule. "Salvatore Moretti." and you're the one going through my restaurant's cellar with a flashlight and a notebook like you're looking for a body." "I'm looking for theft," she said. "Someone here has been replacing your wine with counterfeit and pocketing the difference. I found 4 bottles tonight. That's roughly $44,000 in fraud, and I haven't finished the east wall." Something changed behind his eyes. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. The recognition of a man who had suspected a wound existed somewhere in his own house and had just been handed the exact location of it. "Sit down," he said. It was not a request the way most men made requests. It had the shape of one, but the weight of an order, and yet she found herself pulling out the chair anyway, because she had questions of her own now, and because some professional instinct told her this was not a man she could afford to walk away from without more information. That was the moment everything changed, though she would not understand how completely until much later. The general manager appeared at her elbow moments later, flustered, apologizing for whatever conversation she had just walked into, and offered to move her to another table for the rest of the audit. She declined. She had 6 more bottles to inspect on the east wall, and a job to finish, and she was not about to let one overheard sentence rearrange her whole evening. She went back to work, running her fingers along foil capsules under the dim light, but she felt Salvatore's attention on her the rest of the night, the way a person feels weather changing before the first drop falls. He did not approach her again. He simply watched and let her feel watched, which she suspected he understood was its own kind of pressure. By the time she packed her equipment into its case near midnight, the restaurant had mostly emptied. Dominic had left first, trailing a younger woman he had clearly invited along as an afterthought, and Salvatore had walked him to the door himself, a courtesy that Vittoria now understood was not warmth but strategy. The kind of gesture a man made when he wanted a rival to leave believing he had been treated as an equal, right up until he no longer was one. She learned quickly that the restaurant belonged to him, the way most things in 3 boroughs belonged to him, quietly, through paperwork that named other people, and money that moved through channels designed never to be traced back to Salvatore Moretti directly. He did not say the word family the way other men said it. He said it the way some men said church, with a gravity that did not invite casual conversation. And she understood without being told that she had walked into something considerably larger than a wine fraud case. The younger man at the table, it turned out, was named Dominic, and he worked for a rival operation out of New Jersey that had been circling Salvatore's territory for the better part of a year, testing boundaries, probing for weakness, with the patience of men who had learned that patience was cheaper than war. Dominic had come tonight under the pretense of a dinner between old associates. Vittoria understood, watching the 2 men trade careful pleasantries over wine that at least one of them knew was fake, that this dinner was itself a kind of chess move, and she had just walked directly onto the board. She should have left after dessert. She had every reason to. Her contract with the restaurant ended the moment she filed her report, and nothing obligated her to sit at a table with men who spoke in the coded language of territory and tribute and debts that were never written down anywhere a court could find them. She stayed anyway, because Salvatore asked her, without asking, simply by refilling her water glass himself and not looking away when she caught him doing it. 3 days later, her report was finished, 42 pages documenting a fraud that ran deeper than she had first estimated, involving not just counterfeit bottles, but falsified invoices and a bookkeeper who had clearly been skimming for over a year. She delivered it to the restaurant's general manager, expecting that to be the end of her involvement. Instead, Salvatore Moretti was waiting for her in the parking garage. He did not ambush her, exactly. He stood beside a black car with the patience of a man who had been standing there for however long it took, unbothered by the wait, his hands in his coat pockets and his expression giving away nothing. "You found more than wine," he said. It was not a question. "I found a bookkeeper who's been stealing from you for 14 months, she said, keeping her voice even though her pulse had picked up the moment she saw him. "And I found ledger entries that don't match any restaurant expense I've ever seen. Cash flowing to accounts that aren't in your name but trace back to properties you control." "You weren't hired to look at that." "I look at everything. That's the job. If I only look at what I'm told to look at, I miss the thing someone's trying to hide behind the thing they let me find." He was quiet for a long moment, and in that quiet she understood she had just told a man like Salvatore Moretti that she was smarter than the trap he had probably built for her, whether he had built it consciously or not. His jaw tightened, barely, the only visible sign that her words had landed somewhere real. "Get in the car," he said. "I have my own car," she said. "Get in mine. We need to talk somewhere that isn't a parking garage with cameras on every column." She looked up and confirmed what she already suspected, that he was right about the cameras, and something in her calculated the risk the way she calculated every risk, weighing what she stood to lose against what she stood to learn. She got in the car. He did not take her anywhere dramatic. He took her to a small Italian place in a part of Brooklyn she did not know well, a restaurant with no sign out front and no menu on the table, where the owner greeted Salvatore by a name that was not Salvatore and brought food without being asked. It was there, over a meal neither of them fully ate, that he told her what the bookkeeper had actually stolen, and it was not simply money. The bookkeeper, a man named Freddie Costa, had also been feeding information to the New Jersey operation for months. Dominic's people. Every skimmed dollar had bought a little more access, a little more trust, until Freddie had effectively been sitting inside Salvatore's operation reporting his movements to a rival family, preparing to make a move on his territory. "That's why the dinner," Vittoria said, understanding arriving in pieces. "Dominic wasn't testing you. He already knew things he shouldn't know. He was there to see how close he could sit to you without you noticing what you'd already lost." Salvatore's eyes narrowed slightly, the closest thing to surprise she had seen cross his face since she met him. Most people don't put that together this fast. Most people aren't trained to notice when something's been quietly replaced with something cheaper and passed off as the original, she said. "That's not just wine. That's every kind of fraud there is." For the first time that night, something in his expression shifted that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one, a fraction of warmth that arrived and left so quickly she might have imagined it. He did not thank her. Men like him, she was beginning to understand, did not say thank you the way other people did. He said it by telling her things he had no obligation to tell her, by trusting her with information that could get her killed if it reached the wrong ears. That trust felt heavier than any gift he could have handed across the table. Over the next several days, without either of them naming it as anything, a rhythm formed between them. He would call her office in the late afternoon with a question about the report, though she came to understand these calls were rarely about the report at all. She would answer honestly, sometimes bluntly, and he seemed to genuinely enjoy the bluntness, as though most people around him had long since stopped speaking to him without calculating the cost of every word first. One evening he sent a car to bring her to a small gallery opening he was quietly funding through one of his legitimate businesses, and she stood beside him in a room full of people who had no idea what he was, watching him discuss brushwork and composition with an ease that startled her, because it was the first time she had seen him occupy a room without also measuring its exits. "You know about art," she said, more statement than question. "My mother wanted me to be something else," he said, before my father decided otherwise. "I kept the parts of that life I was allowed to keep." It was a small admission, but she filed it away the way she filed away every detail about him, understanding that a man like Salvatore did not hand out pieces of his history casually, and that each one he offered was, in its own quiet way, a kind of gift. The danger arrived faster than she expected, and it arrived aimed at her directly. 2 nights later, walking to her car after a late consultation at a different restaurant across town, she felt the particular wrongness of being followed before she saw anyone. Footsteps matching hers a half-beat behind, close enough that the rhythm felt deliberate. She did not run. Running told a follower you had noticed, and noticing without reacting was the only leverage she had in an empty parking lot at 11 at night. She reached her car, fumbled her keys on purpose to buy herself a look in the reflection of the window, and confirmed it. 2 men, neither of them Dominic, both of them built like men who solved problems with their hands rather than their words. A voice called her name, and it was not a name most people used. It was the formal one from her business license, which meant these men had done research before finding her. She got into her car fast, locked the doors, and drove straight to the one place she now knew would take a problem like this seriously. The unmarked building 2 blocks from the restaurant where Salvatore kept an office that officially did not exist. He was there when she arrived, at nearly midnight, which told her something about how little he slept and how much he worked. She told him what happened in short, clipped sentences, the adrenaline still sharp in her blood, and she watched something in him go very still and very cold. The stillness of a man deciding exactly how much violence a problem deserved. "They know who you are," he said. "That means Dominic knows you're talking to me. That means he thinks you know something that could hurt him." "I don't know anything that could hurt him. I know about the bookkeeper." "You know enough that he can't be sure what you know," Salvatore said. "That's worse. Uncertainty makes men reckless." He walked to the window, looked down at the street for a long moment, and when he turned back to her, his voice had dropped into something quieter, something that cost him more to say than the words themselves suggested. "I told him you were mine before I meant it as anything but a way to shut him up. That was a mistake. Now he believes it, and a man like Dominic doesn't let go of something he believes belongs to a rival. He'll use you to get to me, whether it's true or not." "Then make it true," she said, before she had fully decided to say it, the words arriving from somewhere braver and more honest than the careful part of her brain that usually filtered everything before it reached her mouth. He looked at her for a long, unreadable moment, and something in the room's temperature changed the way it had changed the first night at the restaurant table. "You don't know what that costs," he said. "Not really." "Tell me then," she said. "Don't decide for me what I can carry." That was the moment he crossed the room and stood close enough that she could feel the heat off him, close enough to smell the cedar and tobacco of his cologne without straining for it. And he did not touch her, not yet. He simply stood there, letting the choice sit fully in her hands, because a man who had spent his whole life taking things by force understood that this particular thing could not be taken that way. She was the one who closed the distance. The kiss was not soft. It carried the entire evening in it, the fear in the parking lot, the fury in his eyes when he learned what they'd tried, the exhaustion of 2 people who had both spent their lives being careful and had just decided, for one reckless moment, not to be. When it ended, he rested his forehead against hers, breathing like a man who had just put down something heavy he had been carrying a long time. "This doesn't end clean," he said. "You should know that going in." "I do the books for a living," she said. "I've never once seen anything end clean." The weeks that followed moved faster than she was prepared for. She learned the shape of his world in pieces, the way information moved through it, the language of respect and debt that governed every conversation she overheard. And she learned, more slowly and more painfully, the shape of the man underneath the suits and the stillness. He told her about his brother one night when neither of them could sleep. A man named Enzo, who had been Salvatore's second in every sense that mattered, closer than blood should have made necessary, and who had died 11 years ago in a car that had not been meant for him. It had been meant for Salvatore. Enzo had taken his seat that night as a favor, running an errand that should have taken 20 minutes, and Salvatore had spent every year since carrying a guilt he had never once spoken aloud to anyone who was not now lying beside him in the dark. "I put him in that car," Salvatore said. "Not with my hands, with my life. Everything I built, everyone who wanted me dead because of it, all of that climbed into that seat with him." She did not offer empty comfort. She had learned by now that this was not a man who wanted his pain smoothed over with soft words. Instead, she said the only true thing she had. "You didn't pull a trigger. Somebody else decided that car needed to explode. You've been paying a debt that isn't yours to pay." He turned to look at her in the dark, and for the first time since she had met him, his composure cracked all the way open. Not into tears. He was not a man built for that kind of collapse, but into something rawer and more honest than she had seen from him yet. A grief he had clearly never let anyone witness before. That was the night she understood she was not simply attracted to a dangerous man. She had fallen for the specific weight he carried, and the specific way he had chosen, despite everything, not to become numb to it. The danger, however, had not paused to wait for their feelings to catch up. Dominic's move came on a Thursday, sharp and precise, timed for a night when Salvatore was pulled across the city to handle a dispute at one of his warehouses. A distraction, she would later understand, engineered specifically to draw him away from anywhere near her. She was leaving her own office when the black sedan pulled alongside her on the street. Too close, too deliberate, and the back door opened before she had fully registered the danger. She did not scream. Screaming wasted the half-second she needed to think. Instead, she threw her laptop bag hard into the face of the man reaching for her, buying herself the space to pivot and run for the lit storefront of a bodega on the corner, where she yanked the door open and stood in full view of the cashier and 3 customers, forcing the man who had followed her to abandon the attempt or commit violence in front of witnesses he could not afford. He chose to disappear back into the car. She had bought herself the win with nothing but a laptop bag and the refusal to freeze. Her hands did not stop shaking for several minutes, but she noticed, even through the fear, that she had not once considered simply screaming and hoping. She had thought. She had moved. That, she realized later, was the difference between the woman she had been before this world found her and the woman standing in a bodega with her pulse hammering against her ribs, refusing to be anyone's easy target. The cashier offered her a chair and a bottle of water she did not open. She kept her eyes on the street through the front glass, counting cars, memorizing the make and color of the sedan in case it circled back, and only once she was certain it was gone did she let herself reach for her phone. She called Salvatore from inside the bodega, hands shaking now that the adrenaline had nowhere left to go, and she heard something in his voice when he answered that she had never heard from him before, a fear that had nothing to do with himself. "I'm coming," he said. "Stay where people can see you. Don't move." He arrived in under 10 minutes, and when he found her still standing near the register, unharmed but pale, he did something she had not expected from a man who prided himself on controlled stillness. He pulled her against him, hard enough to feel like relief made physical, and held her there in front of the cashier and the security camera and anyone else who cared to look, not caring for once who saw. "They came for you because of me," he said into her hair. "That was never supposed to happen. I should have kept you further from this." "I don't want to be kept further from anything," she said. "I want to be close enough to matter, and I want to matter enough that you tell me the truth about what happens next, instead of trying to protect me by leaving me in the dark." "What happens next is that Dominic pays for this personally," Salvatore said. and something in his voice had gone past anger into a colder register entirely, the register she imagined he used when deciding things that could not be undone. She should have stepped back from that coldness. Instead, she found herself asking a question that surprised even her. "Let me help you end it." He looked at her like she had said something in a language he did not fully believe he understood. "You're not part of this world. I'm the one who found the fraud that started this. I'm the one who understands ledgers and accounts and paper trails better than anyone on your payroll. If Dominic thinks I know something dangerous, let me actually know something dangerous. Let me find the thing that ends this permanently instead of just making it personal." It took him 2 days to agree, and when he finally did, it was with the reluctant respect of a man who had learned that trying to shield her only put her in more danger than trusting her with the truth ever would. He set 2 conditions before he agreed. She would work only from the offices his most trusted people used, never alone, and she would tell him the moment anything felt wrong, no matter how small. She agreed to both, understanding that these were not restrictions born of doubt in her ability, but the closest thing to fear he was willing to show her out loud. What she found, working through nights with bank records Salvatore's people obtained through channels she chose not to ask about, was that Dominic's operation had been quietly laundering money through a chain of storage facilities registered to shell companies that all led back 3 layers deep to a name that meant nothing to most people, but meant everything to a federal task force that had been building a racketeering case against the New Jersey family for 2 years without enough evidence to move. "This isn't just leverage against Dominic," she told Salvatore, laying the documents across his desk at nearly 3 in the morning. "This is enough to bury the whole operation legally, without you having to lift a hand, without another body, without another parking lot ambush. You feed this to the right investigator anonymously, and the federal government does what you don't have to." He studied the pages for a long time, and she watched him weigh something she suspected he had never weighed before: the option of ending a war without personally shedding blood for it, a version of justice that did not require him to become the thing his enemies expected him to be. "You could have just handed me a gun and pointed me at him," he said finally. "Most people in your position would assume that's what I wanted." "I know exactly what you want," she said. "You want this over without losing anyone else the way you lost Enzo. This ends it without anyone else's blood on your hands, or mine." He looked at her for a long moment, something unguarded moving across his face, and then he said the thing she had been waiting weeks to hear without knowing she was waiting for it. "You're not just mine anymore," he said quietly. "You're the reason I still recognize the man I was before all of this. I did not think that man was still in here somewhere. You found him." She did not answer with words right away. She reached across the desk and set her hand over his, over the same scarred knuckle she had noticed the first night at the restaurant, and let the silence between them say what neither of them had the language for yet. It was not a declaration. It was steadier than that, quieter, the kind of understanding that did not need to be spoken to be permanent. The information reached the right hands within a week, delivered through channels careful enough that no thread led back to either of them, and the raid that followed dismantled Dominic's operation from the inside out, federal agents moving on the storage facilities before anyone in New Jersey had time to burn a single ledger. Dominic himself was arrested attempting to cross into Pennsylvania with 2 duffel bags of cash and a phone full of messages that would keep prosecutors busy for months. The story made 3 lines in a local paper, nothing more, a fraction of the truth of what had actually collapsed that week, and Vittoria understood that this was exactly how Salvatore had wanted it. No headlines, no martyrs, just an ending, quiet and total. The kind of ending that did not invite anyone to come looking for revenge later. It was not clean. Salvatore lost 2 men in the fallout, associates who had been quietly loyal to Dominic and who tried, in the chaos, to make one final move against him before the arrests locked everything down. Vittoria stood beside Salvatore in the aftermath, in a warehouse that smelled of cordite and cold concrete, and watched him make the hard calls that a man in his position had to make, watched the violence of his world resolve itself the way it always had, swift and economical and utterly without waste. She did not flinch from it. She had chosen this with open eyes, the way she had told him she would, and she did not pretend now that the choice had been anything other than what it was. Weeks later, once the dust had settled and the restaurant's cellar had been fully restocked with bottles that were exactly what their labels claimed, Salvatore found her at the same table where they had first sat across from each other, the same candlelight, the same white tablecloth, though this time there was no younger man across from him testing boundaries he had no right to test. "I told him you were mine before I believed it myself," Salvatore said, turning the old signet ring on his finger the way he did when a thought weighed on him. "I said it to close a door in front of a man I didn't trust. I did not expect the words to become the truest thing I've said in 11 years. "And now?" she said. "Now I know exactly what I meant," he said, and for the first time since she had met him, the almost smile she had glimpsed once in a parking garage arrived in full, reaching all the way to his eyes. She did not ask him for a ring or a promise wrapped in ceremony. She had learned enough about this world to know that the truest vows in it were rarely spoken in churches. She reached across the table instead and set her hand over his, over the scar on his knuckle and the ring that had belonged to someone he had loved and lost, and she let the gesture say what neither of them needed to put into words anymore. Outside the restaurant window, the city moved on the way it always did, indifferent to the war that had ended quietly in its shadows, and Vittorio Ricci sat across from a man who had once been a stranger's careless claim across a dinner table, and had become, through danger and choice and the slow, unbearable weight of trust, the one truth she had never once had to audit. Later that night, walking with him along the cold street outside, she thought about how strange it was that her whole career had been built on finding what people tried to hide: the counterfeit label, the falsified invoice, the seam where something real had been swapped for something cheap. She had spent years training herself to distrust the surface of things, and yet here she was, beside the one man whose surface had turned out to be exactly as dangerous as it looked, and beneath it, exactly as true. He did not try to be softer than he was for her benefit, and she did not pretend the violence of his world did not exist. They simply walked forward into it together, eyes open, neither one asking the other to become something they were not. At the corner, he stopped, took her hand, and pressed the old signet ring briefly into her palm before closing her fingers around it. Not as a proposal, not as ceremony, but as a fact laid plainly on the table the way he laid every fact he trusted her with. "Keep this until I ask for it back," he said. "I don't think I will." She closed her hand around the ring and did not let go, and somewhere behind them the restaurant's lights dimmed for the night, and the city kept moving, and for once neither of them needed to watch the door. If you made it this far, you already know this is the kind of story that stays with you long after the screen goes dark. If you loved this one, hit subscribe so you never miss the next dangerous man and the woman who refuses to run from him. Drop a comment telling me which line hit you hardest, and I will see you in the next story.